Welcome to my homestead, y'all. I'm your host, Jenny Velicky, also known as the Funky Farm Girl. I'm working to create a home with a little farm, a little faith, a lot of food, and a bit of funky. I'm learning all about growing and preserving our food supply, raising chickens and children, and becoming more self-sufficient while leaning hard on Jesus. And I want to take you along for the ride. So grab yourself a cup of something wonderful and let's visit a while. Hey y'all, this is the Funky Farm Girl and you're listening to episode 22, Anyone Can Homestead. Welcome back. This is Jenny Velicky and I am the Funky Farm Girl. I'm so glad that you're here with me this week. This is an episode that I'm really excited about sharing with you guys because this reveals a dirty little secret of mine and also just really encourages you that anyone can homestead. But before we get into the episode and to my dirty little secret, let's start with what's going on the homestead. This is a new little feature that I have that's just a little weekly update of all the things that we're doing around the Funky Farmhouse. So let's get started. This week we are picking up another chicken coop for some Polish chicks that were born today. So sometime in the next 7 days before my next recording, hopefully, I will have picked up the coop and we'll have picked up the chicks. And we will be on our way to starting with some Polish chicks. These chicks are part of a project that Gracie is doing, my oldest daughter. She wants to get into breeding and incubating eggs. And selling raised chicks and pullets and roosters next spring. And so we are starting with some Easter Egger Black Copper Marin mix chicks that we already have. We have 2 hens and what we believe at the moment is possibly 2 roosters. But one of those roosters, we're not quite sure if it's a boy or a girl yet. Leaning more towards the rooster. But we also are going to be getting probably about a half dozen of these Polish chicks with the expectation that these will either be bred and or sold in the spring. I've also been dealing with a worm infestation in my melon patch. And so pretty much every cantaloupe and Kajari melon that I had growing on the vine that was beginning to produce and do well has been infested with these little worms. And so they are burrowing little holes in my melons and eating them and causing them to start to decompose before they even get completely ripe. And because I also have loofah growing there, I believe I'm going to go ahead and pull out all of that in the next couple days and go ahead and plant some of my other fall crops that I've been waiting a little bit longer to plant, like my kohlrabi and my kale and the collard greens and turnip greens and things like that. So I may go ahead and get that underway and leave the loofah in the back to continue growing. Right now I have 3 loofah gourd and I'm very excited to see how those do when it comes time to harvest. So let's get into this week's episode. This week we're talking about Anyone Can Homestead. I want to shout out my friend Rosanna for giving me the topic for this week. She lives in the city and she says, how can I homestead right where I am? She's been inspired by the podcast and she wants to know more about what she can do right where she is. And really that is a passion of mine that I really hope to begin to develop more content for as we go through this podcast. So I hope you'll continue to stay tuned for specific episodes that will tackle each of these little things that we'll talk about today. But I was really excited to get her topic idea because I feel like that this is something that a lot of people that I know would say. Jenny, it's great that you live in the country. It's great that you have land and that you are able to do all the things you're doing. But I live in a neighborhood. I live in the city. I live in an apartment. I live with an HOA. And so some of these things can be barriers and hindrances, but none of them are enough to really exclude you from the homesteading lifestyle. And right about now is when I'm going to reveal my dirty little secret. And that is, we live in a neighborhood. You heard that right. I don't have a gigantic homestead. I don't have a ton of land. I don't live on a giant farm. I'm on just under 3/4 of an acre in a neighborhood in rural North Carolina. Now, this neighborhood has about 30 homes. All of them have yards about the size of mine or bigger. I think the largest yard is about 1.5 acres. But those 30-ish houses are anywhere from 3/4 to 1.5 acres of land. And they're very spread out. We are the only ones in our neighborhood who have any kind of chickens or big garden or anything like that. There are a few neighbors that have a small little garden, but we were the first to have chickens in here. And so it feels a little crazy to be talking to you about homesteading when I live in a neighborhood. So I want you to know that a lot of these things were things that I had to overcome myself even before we moved here. A lot of the things that I learned and started to do were things that I did in a cookie cutter house in a cookie cutter neighborhood in the suburbs on 0.17 acres of land with virtually no backyard. And so I want to encourage you that yes, you can homestead right where you are today. You can begin a homesteading lifestyle, because it is really more about a lifestyle and perspective shift and not about a location. Anyone can homestead, no matter if they live in the city, in a neighborhood, in an apartment, or in the country on a lot of land. So homesteading is a producer-focused lifestyle versus a consumer-focused lifestyle. And what that basically means is you're focused on being as self-sufficient as you can in your current circumstances. So for us, that means we have the land and the space to raise chickens so that we can harvest eggs from them. We don't quite have enough space to really do meat birds well, because we don't have the ability to move them from place to place and give them different pasture to feed on and grow and have all the space that they would need. And so that's something we've decided not to do right now. But we can grow gardens, we can grow food and herbs and flowers, and we can grow chickens who will produce eggs for us. And so we are doing all that we can do with the circumstances that we have. We are producing food and we are producing eggs and chickens. Come this spring, we'll be producing chickens that we can sell to other people who would like to homestead. And we'll be able to produce eggs and hatch those and sell chicks or pullets or whatever. And so that will be one small way that we will expand our homestead. We're also looking into my daughter Georgia beginning to raise rabbits, and that we can do for meat, we can do for pets, we can raise them and collect the poop and sell the poop. And so she's going to be adding to our little homestead in that way come this spring. So really focusing on producing, not consuming. So growing food instead of buying processed food. Experiencing things instead of buying more stuff. And learning old-fashioned skills rather than buying something ready-made or buying something already done or a prefab or whatever. Learning the skills it takes to create that. So, How can you do those things no matter where you are? Let's break this down into some simple action steps. Number 1, grow some food. You can begin by eliminating processed foods from your diet. And basically for us, we started with increasing the amount of fruits and vegetables we were eating and decreasing the amount of boxed pasta meals or rice-a-roni or those types of things that we were eating. We cut those back. And then when we did have that, we had that from pasta sauce we had made ourselves versus buying it pre-made in a jar. We did it with seasoning rice that we bought in bigger bags rather than a pre-pack mix that came in a cardboard box. Simple things like that at first. We are still working on creating our own dressings and condiments. That's where my focus currently is, in eliminating processed foods, because we do still have probably about 20% processed foods in our house. But there are lots and lots of ways that you can begin to do that. And I really encourage you to do it in baby steps. Take one thing at a time. Think about breakfast. What could you do for breakfast that would eliminate processed foods? Maybe your kids are used to Fruit Loops. What could you teach them to like and begin to feed them differently? That would be more whole foods and homegrown things rather than processed food. So one step is to begin to eliminate processed foods. Another thing is to learn to cook from scratch, and that goes hand in hand, because it's not a matter of let's take away all these things, but they need to be replaced with something. And the more your family is exposed to whole, good food, and the more they experience that, the more they will crave that over the processed foods. And then another small step that you can do is to start a garden. And if you're like me, in our previous home, like I said, we lived on 0.17 acres in a cookie cutter house in a cookie cutter neighborhood with virtually no backyard. The yard that we had was very, very sandy, rocky soil that was very, very hard. Nothing grew there, even grass, and it was very difficult to get anything to grow there. However, even in those conditions, there are things that you can do. You can do an in-ground garden if you have good soil. For example, where we live now used to be a cow pasture, and so this is very, very rich, fertile soil, and we've had no problem getting things to grow, no problem working the soil and preparing it to plant. But if you don't have that, you can always build a raised bed, and you can put dirt that is high quality and the type that will help your plants to flourish, and you can mix that with compost and peat moss and all those types of things to really create some really, really healthy soil. And you can grow that on top of the dirt in your yard. And over time, that will begin to transform the dirt underneath it as well. You can also, if you have a small yard, you can go vertical to save space. You can do trellises. You can do growing upwards on arches or fences or things like that. Look around your yard and think about all the different places where you could go up with something. I grew quite a lot of cucumbers this year on a small 4-foot piece of fence, front and back, and a little bit in front of that with another row. And I had more cucumbers than I could possibly deal with. So it can be done if you think strategically about placement and you think strategically about where can you build up rather than out. Another thing to consider would be containers and grow bags. Grow bags are basically a fabric type bag that you fill with soil and then grow things in it. It's almost like a portable raised bed, because at the end of the year you can dump that dirt out, move it wherever you want to, and put dirt back in it and do it again. So grow bags are really a good way to go if you don't have space for a raised bed. Or you could do containers, and those, there are lots and lots of plants that contain container varieties. You can grow bush beans instead of pole beans. You can grow, we grew a type of cherry tomato that was on a small bush rather than a big tall thing this year. So there's lots of different things that you can grow that don't need a whole lot of space and would do well in a container. Just be sure that you have good quality soil in those containers, that you have proper drainage and those types of things. And again, this is stuff that we can get into more in future episodes to help you really equip you to garden well in a smaller space. You can also use containers for herbs and flowers to bring in pollinators. And those herbs can be brought inside in the wintertime and kept on your kitchen windowsill and things like that, to where you're extending your growing season. And there's lots and lots of things you can do with containers that would expand the amount of growing potential that you have in an apartment balcony or in a neighborhood with a small yard. Also consider edible landscaping. There are a lot of beautiful, beautiful plants that produce vegetables. There's a particular curly kale that is deep purple that would be a beautiful landscape border. There's lots of different sweet peas, when they grow up the vine, look beautiful with all their pea blossom flowers. They would be great growing on the fence along the side of your yard. Just think through and Google the types of things that you would want to grow and see what they look like. These are especially beneficial when it comes to things like herbs. Those do really, really well in landscaping for edible landscapes. And also, even don't even think in terms of specifically food-based, but what are beneficial flowers that you could plant? For example, I have a hibiscus bush right by my front door steps, and it's a beautiful, beautiful bush, and it produces beautiful flowers, and then I can take the calyx off of those flowers and dry those and make tea and use that tea through the winter. So even something like that, or chamomile, calendula, those types of things can be used to make herbal teas and salves and ointments and tinctures and all kinds of things like that. So don't just think in terms of food, but what other things could you be growing with herbs and flowers that also would look beautiful in your landscaping? And again, I encourage you, go Google edible landscapes. Go on Pinterest and get tons and tons of ideas of different things that look beautiful and also can feed or provide for your family in a certain way. And then I encourage you, even through the winter, you can grow microgreens and herbs in your kitchen. Microgreens are super easy to grow. They either will grow in a jar or on a mat, and it's a very inexpensive thing to begin doing. And those greens will look a lot like, you may see like alfalfa greens, alfalfa sprouts in the grocery store, and they will look very similar to those, but you can get those in radish and broccoli and alfalfa and all different types, and they are nutrient dense foods. You can add them to salads, you can put them on sandwiches, you can do a lot of things with those. You can add them to smoothies. but that's a way to add in nutrient-dense food that your family's eating that you've grown yourself. And that's something that can be grown year-round in your kitchen right there on your countertop. And then think about herbs that do well indoors and have those in different places to decorate your house and to provide useful food, as well as beautifying your home and bringing the outdoors in. And then for food that you can't grow yourself, look into buying local and in season, and really begin to try to focus on eating local food and in season food. Do I think it's sustainable to completely replace your grocery store with local farms? Probably not, but you can put a big dent in it, a lot bigger than you think. Also, I really encourage you to look for farms that do bulk sales. For example, we have 2 different farms close to us that sell canning tomatoes by the 25-pound box. So I went and got a 25-pound box of tomatoes, and I processed those, and I made it into plain tomato sauce. And I was able to water bath can that and put it away in my canning closet for the winter. And this doesn't even have to be stuff that you find at the farm. You can find, for example, I was in my local grocery store one day and walked by the cart that they have that they will put ripe produce in bags and mark it down, or bruised things or things like that. I always check that place when I'm in the grocery store. And this particular day, they had tons and tons of peaches. And I took those peaches home and I peeled them and chopped them, and I made jam from those peaches. And that has been some of the best jam we have had all season. And that's a quick and easy way to do something with food that you didn't grow, but you're still producing something for your family to eat and use the rest of the year. So be aware of what's in season. Buy those things in bulk when you can and preserve them and hang on to them for the winter months. And that will get into some of our old-fashioned skills later in the podcast. So, number 1, we want to grow food in whatever way we can, in whatever scale that we're able to do, utilizing all the spaces and all the different ways that we can grow food. Number 2, we want to clear away stuff and value experiencing life. You can choose in life to be a stuff manager or a life manager. And I decided several years ago that I would much rather manage a life of interests than a house of stuff. And so we have, over the years, continued to pare down. I thought the first time around that when we got rid of over half of our stuff, that was it, that I had reached the level that was comfortable and was manageable for us. But we continue to purge and to pull things out and to minimize even more. And that does not mean that we have a spare home. We absolutely do not. We have 3 girls, and they are all in preteen to teen years, and girls have lots of stuff. So it has made our home easier to manage because they've learned to value the things that they have and to only keep the things that really, really matter. And so that has helped. They are still learning. They are definitely not there at all. But we are teaching them to value people and experiences over things. And really, as you get into a homesteading lifestyle and you begin to do things the old-fashioned way, and you begin to do things the low and slow way rather than the fast and consumer way, it takes time and it takes energy. And when you're having to choose between cleaning your house or weeding your garden, you really want that house to be as maintenance free as possible so that you're able to spend more of your time on your homestead doing your homesteading things. And so to me, having my house as close to autopilot as I can get it is a really big part of this. People who homestead value simple living, and so they want simple possessions. Keeping in mind that everything that you own requires some type of maintenance, whether it be clothes that need to be washed and folded and put away and switched out seasonally, or whether it be dishes that, even if you only use them at Christmas, have to be brought out and washed and used and stacked and packed and put away until the next year. Anything like that requires some type of maintenance. So anytime you're about to purchase something, think to yourself, what work is this going to cost me? And is that what I would like to be doing with my life? Is that how I want to be spending my time? And really, embracing a simple life begins with simple possessions. And when your possessions are simple, then your focus isn't on your stuff, it's on what you're doing, and it's on the people around you and the things that you're experiencing. And that really doesn't require a lot of things. So, number 2, clear away the stuff and value experiencing life. Number 3 way that anybody can homestead is to learn old-fashioned skills. Homesteading, I have found out, is more about experience than efficiency. There is always going to be a faster, better way to do something, but that's doesn't necessarily make it the best way to do it. For example, you can microwave dinner. You can pop something in the microwave and microwave dinner and have something to eat. Or you can slow roast a chicken and eat that with vegetables for dinner, and then take that carcass and slow cook it all day long the next day with some vegetable scraps from your dinner and make it into broth that your family will use for another meal. It's really about valuing the experience rather than getting it done quickly. And when you do that, you begin to be more present in what you're doing. You really begin to soak in the smell of that chicken and the texture of the vegetables and the richness of that broth and the moisture of the meat and just all those things. Whereas when you eat a microwave meal, you tend to just wolf it down and move on. And so it's really about valuing the experience of doing the thing as much as the thing itself. And so there is therapy in kneading bread. There is therapy in pulling weeds and planting things. So some examples of old-fashioned skills that you could learn would be making homemade bread. There is a huge group of people who do sourdough. I have not been able to master that. I've tried it several times, and it's just not in my repertoire. And I've learned that not all homesteaders have to do all things. And so that's something I've let go of. But yeast bread is something that I'm fairly comfortable with. And it's not something that I do often, but when I do it, it's because it's an enjoyable thing to do. I'm enjoying the process and the procedure of mixing the flour and the water and the yeast and kneading it by hand and shaping the dough and watching it rise and baking it in the oven and enjoying it while it's hot and fresh. And so it's a whole experience. It's not a task to just cross off my list and make bread. The same with canning. I really have enjoyed this year making pickles for the most part. I did try some bucket pickles that, honestly, by the end of it, we called them crying pickles because they were attached sentimentally to my husband's grandmother and her recipe and his growing up. And so they were very sentimental, and all the people in his family who ate them were about in tears because it was such a special thing. But I was also about in tears because it was such a long, drawn out, very involved process that it was kind of stressful. So, but overall, I loved making things and canning them and being able to share them with family and them go, wow, I've never had this before, or this is amazing. I can't believe you made this. And to be able to look in my little front closet in my living room and see jars lined up full of things that I've made for my family to eat through the winter is just such a satisfying experience. You can also learn to do handmade goods, and that could be anything from soap to clothing to woodworking, anything where it's more about appreciating quality over quantity. It's about learning the process and, again, being present in the experience of creating something and marveling at the workmanship and the design and the style of what you're doing. So some people make soap from their goat's milk, from goats that they raise. Some people will raise alpacas and take that fleece from the alpacas and turn it and make yarn that they either sell to fiber artists or they use themselves to knit things or crochet things for their family. Some people like to work with wood and to do things like that. Other people may do embroidery or cross-stitching or any of those types of things. And not only is it enjoyable, but it's fruitful. It builds character. It builds concentration skills. It gives you things that aren't just something from Target that will eventually end up at Goodwill, but it's something that could possibly be passed down from generation to generation through your family. And so it's about even learning to adapt and make do with something rather than going and buying new. Maybe you're trying to figure out how to make homemade something and you need a particular ingredient that you don't have, and so you tweak your recipe and you make it a little bit different because you don't have that, but you do have this other thing that you can use. It may be about building a chicken coop from reclaimed materials or building your raised beds from reclaimed materials. There's a lot of resourcefulness that comes with homesteading. And again, it's that lifestyle perspective of making do and using what you have to its fullest benefit rather than just jumping in the car and going to Lowe's and buying something new. So, number 3, learn old-fashioned skills. Last but not least, let's talk about animals. Every good homestead has some animals, right? There are many possibilities for animals when you have a homestead. You could raise pigs or chickens or goats or horses or cows or guineas or rabbits or chickens or quail. I've probably repeated myself at this point. There's just lots and lots of different options. But when you are in a neighborhood, it's a little bit different. And so the first thing you need to do is find out if you are in a neighborhood that has an HOA, does your neighborhood have provisions for backyard chickens? Some of them will specifically prohibit them. Some of them will specifically have parameters around which you can have this many. You can't have roosters. They can't be free range. They have to be within your fenced yard and those kinds of things. So number 1 would be to check out your HOA's provisions. We're fortunate that we live in a neighborhood with no HOA, and so we're able to do whatever with our chickens. However, even just a little ways up the road from us, if we were in the town limits of our town, the town has regulations. about chickens within the town limits. So be sure to check your HOA regulations if you are in an HOA, and also your local town ordinances if you're within the city limits of a town, so that you know what is required of you as a chicken owner before you make any kind of investment. Chickens are the easiest thing to raise in your backyard. And I will go back and say that if there's nothing specifically prohibited in your HOA, make an appeal to the board and keep them on the up and up from the beginning. Go to them with a proposal and say, I would like to have this many hens. I don't plan to have roosters. I'm going to keep them in a run. That run will be enclosed in my backyard with a fence and da-da-da. And you probably will be okay if there's not already an ordinance in place. But again, I highly encourage you to get all that lined up with your town and with your HOA before you make any kind of investment. And then, like I said, chickens are one of the easiest things to raise for homestead. It's considered the gateway animal to homesteading. You start with chickens and then you broaden out into other things. And so chickens are fairly easy to keep up with once you have a place set up for them where they are not prone to predators, and you are able to feed them and give them water in a place that they have a little bit of shelter from wind and rain, and they have a coop to sleep in at night and a place to lay eggs. That's really all they need. You will find in the chicken community that there are a lot of people who treat them the way they treat their pets, where they are family members and they go way over the top helping that animal with every little thing. And if you're new to chicken raising, that can feel overwhelming and it can feel required. But if you look at it as these animals work for me and they're doing a job for me, my job is to keep them alive and healthy, and their job is to pay their rent by producing me some eggs. That helps to simplify things a lot. And if you think of it in terms of, would grandma's chickens have needed this? That question has helped me quite a lot in understanding what is and isn't required with our chickens. And also, what if you are able to have chickens, even if you cannot get a rooster, you can get hatching eggs that you can purchase from other local farms, and you can purchase an incubator and you can incubate those eggs to hatch and raise the chicks and then sell the chicks. And chicks usually you can raise in your garage. So that would be another way that you could expand the business of your homestead, or the money side of your homestead, even if all that does is pay for the feed that you're feeding your other chickens. Another thing to consider would be rabbits. Rabbits are a typical pet that most HOAs won't object to, and you can easily have 2 or 3 rabbits on a fairly small piece of property, in a fairly small setup. And you can breed rabbits specifically to sell for pets for people, or you can raise meat rabbits and sell those and allow your customers to do the processing of the meat. And on top of that, you can collect the poop and sell the poop as fertilizer, or use it yourself in your own garden. So I really hope that today's episode has shown you different ways that you can begin to homestead now. Have you considered being a homesteader? I'm guessing that if you're still listening to this podcast series, that homesteading is at least of some interest to you, even if it's just a curiosity. So I hope that today you've learned some ways that you can become a homesteader right where you are. As always, I'd love for you to join me on Instagram where we can continue the conversation. And you can join me next week where we'll start to unpack some of these things that we've been talking about today in more detail. See you next week. Thanks for stopping by, y'all. If you're inspired by what you've heard today, the best compliment you can give me is to share the Funky Farm Girl with your friends. You can stay connected by following the Funky Farm Girl on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until we meet again next week, remember to bloom where you're planted.